They say when you retire, you're supposed to feel proud, like you've crossed some invisible finish line and earned your place in the sun. But as I stood there under those dim banquet hall lights, my name stitched into a gold-plated plaque, shaking hands with people who barely knew me outside the office walls, something didn't sit right in my gut. Maybe it was the champagne, or maybe it was the way my wife Linda laughed a little too hard at my boss's jokes, her hand brushing his arm like it belonged there. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, just the nerves of leaving behind 30 years of routine, but deep down, something was already splintering. There was this uneasy tension vibrating under the surface of that room, like a rubber band stretched too far, just waiting for one final tug to snap. And it did. The moment that changed everything wasn't dramatic, no glass shattered, no screams echoed across the venue, just a simple, careless toast from a man I once admired. Grant Ellis, my boss of over a decade, a man I invited into my home more times than I could count, raised his glass with a smirk that had no place in a celebration of a man's life's work. To Dave, he slurred, clearly several drinks too deep. And to Linda, who kept more than just the home fires burning. The room erupted in laughter, but I just stood there, my smile locked in place, eyes darting to Linda. She didn't look shocked. She didn't laugh, either. She just sipped her wine, cool and composed, like someone who knew the punchline was coming. The world around me blurred for a moment, voices muffled, my vision tunneling down to just the two of them, her red lips, his smug face, and something inside me twisted so violently, I had to grip the table to keep myself from falling over. That night, lying beside her in the silence of our marital bed, the gold watch they gave me still strapped to my wrist, I stared at the ceiling with a mind spinning faster than it had in years. Every business trip, every late night at the office, every sudden cancellation of our plans, they played back like a highlight reel of someone else's life, and I couldn't believe how blind I'd been. I was a man who'd given his youth to a company, his loyalty to a boss, and his love to a woman who sat there that night, beside the man who stole everything from me, pretending it was just another glass of wine, just another toast. But I knew better now. The finish line I thought I'd crossed. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning, of something much darker. And neither of them knew it yet, but they'd just lit the fuse. The ride home from the retirement party was a silent descent into something I couldn't yet name, not quite anger, not quite fear, but something jagged that sat just beneath my ribs, like a sliver of glass working its way inward. Linda drove, her fingers gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly, eyes fixed on the road like it had personally offended her. She hadn't said a word since we left the hotel ballroom, and I didn't press. I just stared out the window, watching the streetlight smear across the glass like the memories that had suddenly turned bitter in my mind, all the little details I'd once brushed aside, the texts she used to hide with a smirk and a "just Susan," the sudden gym membership at 56, the perfume she started wearing that didn't match her personality. All of it swirled in my head like a storm cloud gathering speed, and still, she sat there, humming along to the radio, as if we hadn't just witnessed the public unraveling of our marriage under chandeliers and champagne flutes. When we pulled into the driveway, she finally broke the silence, not with an apology, not with an explanation, but with a casual, almost bored, "You're not really going to dwell on that dumb toast, are you?" The audacity of that sentence, the way it rolled off her tongue like I was some moody teenager sulking over a bad grade, ignited something in me I didn't know I still had. I asked her, point blank, if there was anything she wanted to tell me, and she just laughed, this dry, humorless chuckle that made my skin crawl. "You're tired," she said, reaching for the door handle, and probably had one too many drinks. "Just go to bed." I watched her walk into the house like nothing was wrong, like the foundations of my life hadn't just been kicked out from under me, and I knew then that if I didn't do something, if I didn't find the truth with my own two hands, she'd keep treating me like the fool she clearly believed I was. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my den, surrounded by the trophies of a life I thought had meaning, plaques, framed photos, signed baseballs from company games, and all I could think about was how easily someone could fake everything. Loyalty. Love. Respect. I replayed that toast over and over in my head, each time peeling back another layer, hearing new inflections, seeing new reactions in my memory's rearview. And something inside me, the same thing that helped me climb from the shipping floor to upper management over 3 decades, whispered cold and clear, she thinks she got away with it. But she hadn't. Not yet. Because the real game hadn't even started. And I don't lose. It's strange how quickly the human brain can turn suspicion into obsession, how easily a single crack in the glass can make the whole window shatter when you look at it long enough under the right light. The morning after the party, I woke before Linda, her body curled peacefully under the covers like she didn't have a single care in the world, like her sleep hadn't been stolen by the ghost of a drunken joke that nearly blew her cover. I watched her for a long while, not out of love, but with the cold curiosity of a man staring at a stranger wearing his wife's skin. Everything about her now felt rehearsed, and I wondered how many mornings she had woken up next to him instead, wearing the same expression of contentment she'd once reserved for me. That thought, the invasion of my home, my bed, my life, rooted itself in my chest like a splinter I couldn't reach, and I knew I wouldn't find peace until I carved it out myself. I started small, methodical, like a man dismantling a bomb he didn't quite understand. I didn't rage. I didn't confront. I observed. I memorized her routines, took mental snapshots of how she moved through the day, what she touched, when she laughed, what time she left for yoga or coffee or errands that always seemed to stretch just a little longer than they used to. I began combing through our shared iCloud storage, the one she forgot we even had, and that's where I found it, a photo she had clearly meant to delete, and almost did. A sliver of a hotel room mirror. A blurred shoulder. A belt on the nightstand that wasn't mine. It was nothing and everything all at once. My fingers trembled over the keyboard as I stared at it, because the truth was finally growing teeth, gnashing at the edges of my sanity. And just like that, the war had a face. That evening, she kissed me goodnight like always, same pressure, same smile, but now I knew that smile was a mask and I was no longer the man behind the curtain. I laid beside her in silence, but my heart beat like a war drum beneath the surface of my chest. I'd always considered myself a good man, not perfect, not without his flaws, but good, and now I realized that good men don't win in the world we live in. Good men get replaced. Good men get humiliated. But smart men learn how to burn quietly, until the moment they explode. And I was done being good. They say hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, but I'd argue they've never seen a loyal man betrayed, not just cheated on, but played for years like a fool in his own castle, eating dinner at a table where someone else had already carved the roast. After I found that photo, that smudged mirror reflection of a stranger's belt in what I later confirmed was a Marriott suite downtown, I felt something in me shift from broken to cold. Not cold like anger. No. Cold like calculation. Like steel pulled from a fire and left to cool into something sharp enough to cut bone. I wasn't just going to confirm this affair. I was going to dissect it. I needed names, dates, receipts, and when I was done, I wouldn't just burn the bridge behind her. I'd make sure she had nothing left on the other side to crawl back to. The first thing I did was call Rick Mahoney, a guy I knew from my Army Reserve days, quiet type, former intel, now doing private work. He specialized in digital forensics and surveillance, the kind of guy who could track a ghost through the fog if you gave him a timestamp and a partial license plate. I told Rick everything. No sugarcoating, no pride. Just facts. I needed the who, the when, the where, and above all, I needed to know how deep it went. He agreed without hesitation, and within 48 hours, I had a small fleet of silent weapons at my disposal, GPS trackers, keyloggers, cloned text logs, hidden audio mics that could be tucked into car air vents and bedroom nightstands without leaving a trace. I planted them all myself while Linda was at yoga, or yoga, as I now called it, one tracker beneath the wheel well of her car, one mic under the couch, and another in her purse during one of our grocery runs. She didn't suspect a thing. By the end of the week, I was listening to a conversation between my wife and him, Grant Ellis, and if there was ever any doubt left in my mind, it died right there in my headphones, when I heard him laugh and say, "That speech almost gave it away, huh? Next time remind me not to drink scotch before I speak." Her voice followed, silky and shameless. "You liked the look on his face though, didn't you?" And then, laughter. Their laughter. That sound would haunt me for the rest of my life, not because it was loud, but because it was quiet, so casual, so familiar, so used to deceiving me that they didn't even hesitate. That was the moment the grieving stopped. I wasn't a heartbroken husband anymore. I was something else entirely. I was a man planning justice. The week after I confirmed their affair wasn't marked by rage, screaming, or shattered glass. It was far quieter than that, and far more dangerous. You see, the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones who snarl and thrash, they're the ones who smile while sharpening knives behind closed doors. That's what I became. Every smile I gave Linda that week was a rehearsed performance, every "good morning" was a line from a script I didn't believe in anymore, and every kiss on the cheek felt like pressing my lips against a tombstone. I wasn't mourning our marriage, no, that had already died years ago. I just hadn't read the obituary. I was preparing the burial, the kind that would leave her gasping for breath in a life she thought she controlled. I began documenting everything. Every call. Every text. Every secret meeting in hotel parking lots where Grant's car was always parked 2 spots away from hers. The way she lied to my face and told me she was grabbing dinner with old friends from the garden club, while I watched her enter room 317 of the downtown Sheraton through a live feed tucked neatly inside her handbag, it was almost surreal. I sat in my office, headphones on, the house dark except for the soft blue glow of my monitor, watching my wife kiss another man with the same mouth she once used to whisper our wedding vows. And the worst part? She didn't even hesitate. That's what broke me, not the sex, not the betrayal, but the ease. The casual betrayal, like I was just another chore she forgot to finish. I started to spiral. I lost sleep. I stopped eating. I stared into mirrors longer than I should have, trying to find the version of myself that once believed in forever. I didn't recognize the man who looked back. He was older, colder, and starting to believe that maybe he deserved this, that maybe I had been so dull, so predictable, so safe, that she needed something else. But the flicker of doubt didn't last long, because one night, while scrubbing through an audio recording, I heard something that snapped my spine straight. Linda, laughing again, telling Grant, "He'll never leave me. He's too weak. Besides, half of everything is mine anyway." And that's when it happened. That was my explosion. Not with fire. Not with fists. But with clarity. Because now, I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to destroy them. And I was going to make sure Linda understood what it really meant to lose everything. It's strange how clarity feels, not like peace, not even like strength, but like the eye of a storm where everything slows down just enough for you to make decisions without flinching. The morning after I heard her say I was too weak to leave her, I got out of bed before sunrise, drank a full cup of black coffee without tasting it, and opened a blank legal pad like I was drafting war plans. I wasn't just going to leave Linda. I wasn't just going to expose her affair. I was going to erase her from the life she thought she'd already inherited, surgically, precisely, and without mercy. And when I was done, she wouldn't be able to tell if the man she used to mock had been born for revenge or simply crafted by it. I called Mark Faulkner, a divorce attorney with a reputation that made grown men in country clubs lower their voices when they said his name. We met that afternoon, and I laid everything out on his desk: photos, call logs, GPS data, audio recordings, timestamps, emails, even a synced calendar event where Linda had labeled her trysts with Grant as volunteer committee. Mark didn't speak for a long time after reading, just leaned back in his leather chair, steepled his fingers under his chin, and smiled, not kindly, but like a wolf smelling blood on fresh snow. He told me the words every betrayed husband dreams of hearing: she thinks she's going to take half. Instead, she's about to lose everything. We filed on grounds of adultery that same week, served her in silence, and froze joint accounts while she was getting her nails done. Her screams from the front lawn that day were sweeter than any apology she could have begged for. But I didn't stop there. Grant Ellis, my boss, my so-called friend, he wasn't walking away clean either. I compiled every company email he sent to Linda, every weekend expense reimbursed with company funds, every policy violation tied to their affair. I packaged it neatly in a manila envelope and dropped it anonymously on the desk of our corporate compliance officer. No signature. No return address. Just truth, sharp, undeniable truth that would soon detonate inside the HR department like a pipe bomb. And while Linda paced our driveway in tears, shrieking that I was destroying her life, all I could do was stare at her, not with hate, not with regret, but with the cold detachment of a man who'd already buried what she killed. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. The day I invited them both to dinner, Linda and Grant, I did it with a calm so eerie, even I questioned whether I was losing touch with reality or finally stepping into it. I made the reservation at a quiet, upscale restaurant with white tablecloths, low lighting, and just enough ambience to mask the smell of blood in the water. I told Linda I wanted to talk things through before the divorce got ugly. Her eyes lit up, just for a second, as if she thought I was crawling back. It was insulting, really, how little she understood the storm she'd created. Grant agreed too, likely hoping he could manipulate me into silence or maybe laugh the whole thing off like some cigar club joke. They had no idea they were walking into a trap I'd been building one lie at a time. We sat across from each other, me in my best navy blazer, them acting like they were still on the winning side of a war they didn't know had already ended. The waiter took our orders, and for a brief moment, the table was silent, not awkward, but pregnant with tension so thick it could have strangled a lesser man. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a small black folder, sliding it across the table without a word. Linda frowned. Grant hesitated. But eventually, curiosity won out. He opened it first, and his face dropped. Inside were printouts of every email, every company expense report tied to their little hotel escapades, transcripts from the GPS logs, and a copy of the formal complaint I had submitted to the board of directors. Linda didn't even reach for it, she just stared at me, eyes wide, mouth slightly parted, like a woman who realized too late she was on the wrong side of a locked door. I just wanted you both to know, I said, my voice steady, almost gentle, what it feels like when someone takes everything you built and treats it like a game. Grant tried to speak, a stuttered denial or weak apology, I don't know, but I held up a hand and kept going. You took my time, my trust, and my loyalty. So I'm taking yours, your careers, your reputations, and the future you tried to steal from me. The check arrived. I paid in full, left a generous tip, and stood slowly, savoring the silence. They didn't follow me. They couldn't. I had turned the tables, lit the fuse, and walked away from the wreckage while they sat there, choking on the smoke of their own destruction. And that was just the beginning. The fallout wasn't instant, no, real destruction takes its time, creeping in slow like water under a rotting foundation, and when it finally collapses, it doesn't just fall, it implodes. 2 days after our little dinner, the HR department at Grant's company launched a full internal investigation. The board called an emergency meeting. I didn't need to be there to know what was said, the evidence I handed over spoke louder than any argument ever could. Expense reports for private dinners disguised as business lunches, out-of-town conferences that aligned perfectly with Linda's calendar, and a dozen hotel receipts tied to the company card. It was a buffet of corporate misconduct, and I had prepared every dish myself. By Friday morning, Grant Ellis was no longer Senior VP of Logistics. He was just another name in a press release buried under, effective immediately. Linda found out the same afternoon, storming into the house like a hurricane that forgot it lost its power. Her eyes were red, mascara-streaked, voice trembling with something between rage and desperation as she accused me of ruining her life, as if it hadn't already been rotting from the inside out long before I ever lifted a finger. She screamed that I had gone too far, that this was beyond revenge, and I couldn't help but laugh, not mockingly, but from the sheer absurdity of hearing her say those words, her, the woman who spent years building a second life in secret while I was still bringing her coffee in bed. I stood there, quiet and still, watching her unravel like a spool of lies finally spun out, and the only thing I said, the only thing I needed to say, was, "This is what honesty looks like, Linda." Ugly, sharp, and unforgiving. She didn't sleep in the house that night. She left in her car, sobbing behind the wheel, and for the first time in years, I sat alone in my living room and felt something unfamiliar. It wasn't victory. It wasn't even peace. It was emptiness. But not the hollow kind, no, this was the clean, vacant quiet after a fire has burned everything to ash. There was no more pretending. No more walking on eggshells. The charade had collapsed, the masks had shattered, and all that remained was a man sitting in his own home for the first time in a very long time, no longer afraid of the silence, because now, it was finally honest. The strangest part about freedom is how quiet it is, not the kind of quiet that makes you anxious, like waiting for the other shoe to drop, but the kind that hums low in your chest when you realize that the chaos has finally stopped chasing you. After Linda moved out, or rather, after she fled in a whirlwind of curses, sobs, and shattered illusions, the house settled into an eerie stillness I hadn't felt since we first bought it. No more passive-aggressive clinks of wine glasses in the sink, no perfume-scented lies drifting down the hallway, no icy silences over dinner pretending to be peace. It was just me, the walls I'd built with my own hands, and the sound of my breath not being held anymore. For the first time in decades, I wasn't living on borrowed time in my own home. I was existing without compromise. It didn't take long for the dust to clear, emotionally, legally, and financially. The divorce moved quickly thanks to the mountain of evidence we'd prepared, and thanks to Mark, my attorney. Linda didn't walk away with half like she smugly predicted she would. In fact, she walked away with very little. The prenup she'd forgotten about, the one we'd both signed back when love made us believe in forever, had a faithful fidelity clause that activated like a landmine the second she stepped out of bounds. Combined with the documented adultery and financial misconduct, the judge awarded me the house, most of the retirement savings, and a clean break. Linda, on the other hand, got a small alimony check, a leased car in her name, and the burden of explaining to her family why she was suddenly staying with a friend in a one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispers and watches. I took a trip the week the papers were finalized. Just me, a beat-up fishing rod, a bottle of bourbon, and a lake I hadn't visited in nearly 15 years. As I sat on that quiet dock, feet dangling over the edge while the sun dipped low behind the trees, I didn't think about Linda, or Grant, or even the years I lost being loyal to people who didn't deserve it. I thought about the man I used to be, the one who believed that kindness guaranteed loyalty, that hard work was armor against betrayal, that love, once spoken, couldn't rot. And then I thought about the man I'd become, not colder, not crueler, but wiser, forged not by fire, but by betrayal sharp enough to leave scars. I wasn't broken. I was rebuilt. And this time, no one was going to take me for granted ever again. Some people believe karma is this slow, cosmic process, a gentle balancing act that the universe eventually figures out. But let me tell you something, from the front row of my own personal reckoning, sometimes karma needs a little push. Sometimes, you have to grab it by the collar, look it in the eye, and say, "Let me show you how it's done." A month after the dust settled, I received a letter in the mail from Linda, handwritten, 3 pages long, her familiar script curling with desperation. She wrote about how sorry she was, how she never meant to lose everything, how she had been confused, how Grant had led her astray. She begged to meet. She said she missed me, missed our home, missed the way I made her feel safe. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My silence was the clearest message she'd ever receive. And just to twist the knife a little deeper, I donated a portion of our sold lake house proceeds, in her name, to a local women's shelter. They sent her a thank you card. That part still makes me smile. Grant's fall was even more satisfying. Turns out, he'd been skimming off corporate budgets for years, padding fake invoices under fake vendors, all while lecturing us in board meetings about integrity and fiduciary responsibility. My evidence cracked open a much larger investigation, and by the end of the quarter, he wasn't just out of a job, he was under federal investigation for fraud. Word spread fast. His wife, who I always suspected knew more than she let on, filed for divorce. His kids stopped talking to him. Last I heard, he was renting a room above a bar outside of town, applying for consulting work that never called back. Funny how the man who once walked around like he owned the sky now couldn't even hold on to a lease under his own name. As for me, I kept the house, bought a new truck, and picked up woodworking again, something I hadn't touched since before the stress of marriage made me forget what peace felt like. I reconnected with old friends, the kind who'd stopped inviting us to dinner because Linda always found a way to make the night about her. And then, on an unremarkable Tuesday afternoon, I met someone. Not love at first sight, no fairy tale here, just a kind, steady conversation over coffee with a woman who asked about me instead of what I could offer. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully grasped until then: the life I'd built was never the problem. She was. And now that she was gone, I wasn't starting over. I was finally starting right.